Introduction. The moment of truth. Imagine this. It is 1941. The world is cracking open, and you are standing right in the fracture line. Maybe you're buried in a frozen foxhole on the Eastern Front, where the cold gnaws at bone and steel alike. Or perhaps you're a paratrooper who missed the landing zone by miles, now swallowed by the humid, insect-filled jungles of the Pacific. Your heavy rucksack, the thing you trained with, trusted, depended on, was ripped away in the explosion. Your supply lines have vanished. Your state-of-the-art equipment lies frozen stiff in the cold or rotted apart by tropical moisture. And in that moment, when the world goes silent and survival becomes a coin toss, something hits you with brutal clarity. What decides whether you live to see the next sunrise is not your backpack. It's not the gear catalogue you memorized. It is what you have in your pockets. Welcome to Historia Prime. Today, we're peeling back the layers of a forgotten survival doctrine, a philosophy born in the mud, blood, and chaos of World War II. A philosophy that kept millions alive when everything else failed. They called it the pocket core. And it raises a question many of us never dare to ask. Why is it that, with all our modern luxuries and high-tech tools, we often feel less prepared than our grandfathers did? Why do we get overwhelmed by clutter, options, and complexity, while they survived the greatest war humanity has ever seen, armed with nothing but the fundamentals? In this chapter, we step into the frontline science of World War II to uncover why complexity dies first, but simplicity endures. We'll explore the unlikely tools, yes, even condoms and salt, that became lifelines. We'll look at the ingenious boot hack that stopped the cold itself from killing soldiers in their sleep. And we'll reveal why survival is never about owning more, but about needing less. By the end of this video, you won't just look at history differently. You will look at your own pockets, your own habits, and your own daily carry with the eyes of someone who understands what truly matters when everything falls apart. So take a breath. Strip away the unnecessary. Let's reach into the pockets of the past and uncover the core that kept people alive when gear failed. Let's dive in. Part 1. The philosophy of the pocket. Why gear fails. For the last century, we've been sold a lie. Survival has been packaged as a shopping list, an endless parade of features, functions, and fancy tools that promise safety. We're told that the more we carry, the more prepared we'll be. But World War II shattered that illusion with brutal force. Because in the raw heat of combat, the romantic idea of perfect equipment evaporated instantly. Paratroopers landed in the wrong valleys with nothing but the uniforms on their backs. Supply drops scattered across miles of enemy territory. Vehicles loaded with gear didn't last long. They burned, froze, sank, or broke down within minutes. And when the big gear failed, and it almost always did, the pocket core stepped in. This wasn't a kit you ordered from a catalogue. It was a survival system built on 3 principles: tools that were instantly accessible, items that worked independently, and gear that didn't collapse when one part failed. Think about this for a moment. If you carry a multi-tool and its hinge jams, the entire thing becomes a dead weight. But if you carry a few simple, rugged tools separately, one failure doesn't take the whole system down with it. That's what World War II soldiers understood long before we did. Survival is not built on complexity. It's built on redundancy, independence, and the wisdom to keep things simple. These soldiers learned, often the hard way, that survival is written in the small margins, the quiet moments, the tiny tools, the overlooked details. Not the big dramatic gestures, but the subtle engineering of the everyday. They practiced a kind of frontline, lean thinking, stripping away everything that didn't matter until only the machining of survival remained. Nothing extra, nothing decorative, only what worked when the world was falling apart. And that leads to a question only you can answer. In your own life, what is the heavy backpack you're still carrying? The clutter, the commitments, the tools you think you need, but never actually use. Maybe it's time to rethink your own pocket core. Maybe it's time to look at what truly protects you, what truly serves you, and what you can reach for when everything else slips away. Because when survival hangs by a thread, just like it did for those soldiers, simplicity isn't just elegant, it's life-saving. Part 2. The working edges. Beyond the Rambo knife. When most people today imagine survival, they picture a giant, knife-thick, intimidating, cinematic. Pop culture turned it into a symbol of rugged self-reliance. But for the soldiers of World War II, a knife wasn't a symbol at all. It was a working edge, nothing more, nothing less. These blades were not carried for drama, they were carried because they solved problems every single day. A WWII soldier used his knife to cut rope, pry open ration tins, shape a quick tent peg from a branch, trim bandages in the middle of a firefight, and sometimes even scrape out a shallow foxhole in frozen ground. And if you examine an original knife from that era, you won't find sleek, polished perfection. You'll see thick spines scarred from hard use, edges dulled and resharpened 100 times, tips rounded off by necessity. Those marks aren't defects. They're evidence proof that these tools were shaped by reality, not fantasy. But hidden inside the pocket core was something even more revealing. A tool so small, so humble, most people today laugh at the idea it could save a life. It was the razor blade. Issued primarily for shaving, it quietly became a soldier's precision instrument. When a bulky knife couldn't slip into tight fabric or delicate skin, the razor blade did. Soldiers used it to clean wounds, trim field dressings, modify gear, remove splinters, even perform minor surgery to extract shrapnel. Lightweight, simple, and easily replaced, the razor blade embodied the true spirit of the pocket core. Redundancy through simplicity, power through precision. And within that story lies a lesson for us today. Don't trust a single source of anything, a single tool, a single plan, a single point of failure. The soldiers who endured the harshest conditions on Earth understood that survival wasn't about carrying one ultimate gadget. It was about carrying several humble tools that worked independently, backed each other up, and never demanded more than they gave. Ingenuity is what turns the ordinary into the essential. A big knife looks impressive, but a tiny razor blade saves your life in the dark. So as we continue deeper into the pocket core, ask yourself, are you relying on one oversized solution to fix everything? Or are you building a system that works even when the obvious tool fails? For the soldiers of World War II, the answer made all the difference. Part 3. The Unlikely Heroes. Condoms, Salt, and Sewing Kits. Now we enter the part of history that feels almost unbelievable, thrilling, strange, and yet completely real. Because if I told you that one of the most valuable survival tools of World War II was a condom, would you believe me? It sounds absurd at first, but for soldiers fighting in the mud of Europe, the swamps of Burma, and the rain-soaked islands of the Pacific, the humble, non-lubricated military condom was a miracle of physics and practicality. They used it as an improvised dry bag, slipping it over matches, maps, and even the ends of rifle barrels to keep out water. And in emergencies, it did something even more impressive. It became a collapsible canteen, capable of holding nearly a liter of water. Light as air, tiny in size, yet able to carry life itself. No modern survival bottle matches its volume-to-weight ratio. And then there was salt. Not glamorous, not heroic, but quietly essential. Soldiers lost sodium through sweat faster than they could replace it, especially in the tropics. Without salt, muscles cramped, thinking slowed, and exhaustion hit like a wall. So salt became a guarded treasure, sprinkled into water, added to food, even traded between units as a lifeline against the collapse of the human body. It preserved meat, but more importantly, it preserved men. Yet one of the most underestimated tools of all was the tiny sewing kit, nicknamed the housewife. Inside were needles and thread, so simple, so ordinary, most people would dismiss them instantly. But those who carried them understood the truth. Gear is only useful for as long as you can repair it. A torn uniform, a broken strap, a ripped pack. Any of these could mean losing warmth, losing ammunition, or losing time. But a needle and thread brought things back from the brink. It restored order in a world designed to tear everything apart. And hidden inside these strange objects is a lesson for our modern lives. We replace things the moment they show a flaw. We throw away instead of fixing. We forget that self-sufficiency isn't old-fashioned, it's a form of freedom. The soldiers of World War II knew better. They knew that a condom, a pouch of salt, and a sewing needle could mean the difference between collapse and resilience. They understood that survival isn't about having fancy gear, it's about making what you have work for you. Repair, don't replace. Adapt, don't depend. Because sometimes the smallest tools carry the greatest power. Part 4. The Eastern Front. Boot hack, defeating the air itself. Now picture this. You look out your window and imagine a winter so brutal it stops being weather and becomes a predator. On the Eastern Front, temperatures didn't just fall, they attacked. 40, 50 degrees below zero. The kind of cold that welded metal to bare skin and turned living flesh into dead black wood in a matter of hours. In conditions like that, soldiers learned a terrifying truth. A thicker boot wasn't going to save them. More leather, more padding, more insulation, it all failed. Because the real enemy was not the cold outside the boot, it was the moisture inside it. Every soldier's feet sweat. It's inevitable. In extreme cold, that sweat soaks the socks. The socks freeze. And once that happens, your boot transforms from protection into a coffin of ice wrapped around your toes. It didn't take long before frostbite made its silent claim. But this is where the brilliance of the pocket core emerged again. Soldiers discovered a hack so simple, so ingenious, it spread across front lines like whispered treasure. They stuffed newspaper or straw inside their boots, not for warmth, but as a sacrificial moisture barrier. The paper wicked sweat away from the skin before it could reach the insulation layer. At the end of the day, soldiers pulled out the damp, frozen sheets and replaced them with fresh ones. This tiny adjustment, something high command never issued or taught, saved more feet than any thick boot ever could. It was frontline survival science, created under pressure, refined in the snow, and proven in the darkest winters Europe had ever seen. And within this story is a lesson far bigger than footwear. Your gear, no matter how expensive or advanced, is only as good as the system you use it in. If you don't manage the microclimates of your life, the invisible forces, the small problems you ignore, then no amount of better boots will save you. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. Are you actively managing the small leaks, the creeping stresses, the quiet signals in your own life? Or are you just waiting for a bigger, thicker boot to solve the problem for you? Because survival, then and now, belongs to those who understand the enemy beneath the surface, right down to the moisture inside a frozen boot. Part 5. Psychological Armor, Morale in a Can. Survival has always been more than the body. It is the mind, the quiet battlefield where the real war is fought. In the chaos of World War II, soldiers clung to something unexpected, something small yet powerful enough to lift them above the horror around them. It was a simple can of condensed milk. To anyone else, it was just food. But to a soldier who had marched for days, frozen in snow, soaked in rain, or starved between supply drops, that sweet, thick milk was more than calories. It was comfort. It was a reminder of home, of warmth, of something human when the world felt painfully inhuman. It was, quite literally, hope in a can. And alongside these small treasures, many soldiers carried journals, letters, Bibles, and cherished books. Items with no tactical value, yet immense psychological weight. Writing gave them control over a life spinning into chaos. Faith gave them resilience when logic told them there was none. A few pages of paper could build a wall between despair and determination. The great psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who survived the concentration camps, noticed something profound. Those who found meaning, whether it was the duty to protect family, the hope of returning home, or simply the promise to tell their story one day, were the ones who endured. Purpose, he said, was the final freedom that no enemy could take. This reveals the foundation of the survival pyramid, the will to live. It is more powerful than any knife, any fire starter, any piece of gear. Morale multiplies strength. It keeps the mind sharp, the hands steady, and the heart willing to take one more step when the body wants to quit. And so the question comes to you: what is your condensed milk? What is the small thing, simple, maybe even silly, that lifts your spirits when life pushes you to the edge? Is it a memory, a photo in your wallet, a note on your phone, a ritual, a belief, a taste, a song? Whatever it is, hold on to it, because when everything else falls away, when the boots freeze, the gear fails, and the path ahead grows dark, it's that tiny spark of comfort that becomes your greatest shield. Part 6. Ingenuity as a force multiplier. The sniper's trick. As we move deeper into the pocket core, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Soldiers weren't just carrying tools, they were carrying ingenuity. And in the unforgiving landscapes of World War II, ingenuity was often the sharpest weapon they had. Take the legendary telephone line trick. Snipers operating alone in forests, ruins, or nighttime battlefields needed a way to detect approaching enemies without revealing their position. So they took leftover communication wire thin, silent, nearly invisible, and stretched it around their perimeter. In the pitch darkness, a simple tug on that line sent a vibration straight into their hands. No lights, no noise, no gadgets. Just pure human creativity, turning a scrap of wire into an early warning system that saved lives. And then there was the bucket trick. A method so simple, it feels like something out of a survival manual written by necessity itself. Soldiers tied a lightweight bucket to the end of a long pole and used it to probe the ground ahead. If a buried mine or pressure-sensitive device was lying in wait, the bucket triggered it from a safe distance. A household object became a life-saving shield in one of the most dangerous environments on Earth. These improvised systems show us the beating heart of the pocket core. Because the truth is, the most advanced equipment in the world becomes dead weight if you forget the basics. Batteries die, hinges jam, weather destroys delicate systems. But creativity, raw, adaptable, frontline creativity, never runs out. And perhaps the most important principle of all, there is no such thing as a single-use item in survival. Every object is a puzzle piece waiting to be repurposed. A spoon becomes a lever, a shirt becomes a filter, a wire becomes a trip alarm, a bucket becomes a mine detector. What matters is not what you carry, but how you think. So ask yourself, in a moment of crisis, would you cling to the tool you plan to use, or would you transform the tool you have into the one you need? Because the pocket core isn't really about gear at all. It's about imagination under pressure. And imagination, as those soldiers proved, can be the greatest force multiplier of them all. Part 7. Simplicity under stress. Why modern EDC fails. As we step into the final chapter of the pocket core, we confront a hard truth about our modern world. Today's everyday carry culture, the endless keychains, titanium widgets, multi-tools with 20 different blades, often values appearance more than function. These tools look clever, they photograph well, but in a true moment of crisis, they fail for one simple reason. The human brain collapses under stress long before the body does. There is a phenomenon called cognitive paralysis. When fear spikes, when exhaustion sets in, when pain and cold shake your hands, your brain stops performing delicate tasks. Fine motor skills disappear. Decision-making narrows. Your mind reduces itself to the most basic actions it can still control. And this is where most modern gear collapses. Because a multi-tool packed with tiny blades and miniature screwdrivers demands precision. It demands steady fingers and calm thinking.
But a fixed-blade knife?
A simple screwdriver, a basic tool with one purpose. Those can be used with numb fingers, trembling hands, and a mind running on instinct alone. The soldiers of World War II understood this better than anyone. Their tools weren't pretty. They weren't complicated. They were designed for frozen hands, for bleeding palms, for mud and rain and adrenaline. They were built for the moments when the world tilted into chaos and the body was running on its last reserves. And that leads us to the essential lesson of this chapter. If you can't use a tool while you're exhausted, panicked, or wounded, it is not a survival tool. It's a decoration. So it's time for a personal audit. Look at the things you carry, your pocket knife, your keychain gadgets, your everyday essentials. Do they merely look impressive? Or would they still work after a week in the mud? Would they work if you were shaking from cold, or running on fear, or waking up in the dark with only seconds to act? Because survival, as the Pocket Core shows us again and again, has nothing to do with complexity. It is simplicity tested, proven, and sharpened by stress that keeps people alive. Conclusion: the survival mindset for 2026. As we reach the end of this journey through the Pocket Core, one truth stands above all the others. The soldiers of World War II didn't survive because they carried the biggest packs or the longest lists of equipment. They survived because they mastered something far more powerful: restraint, clarity, judgment, and the discipline to trust simplicity over clutter. Preparedness, they learned, was never about owning more. It was about needing less. The Pocket Core was never just a handful of items tucked into a uniform. It was a philosophy of resilience, an understanding that the strongest systems are built on essentials, not excess. It was a reminder that simplicity, when tested by fire, becomes the highest form of sophistication. And in a world that grows more complex every year, that lesson is more relevant in 2026 than it has ever been. So here is your challenge from Historia Prime. First, focus on ingenuity over gear. Tools break. Batteries die. But a flexible mind and a willingness to adapt can turn anything, a wire, a bucket, a scrap of paper, into a lifeline. Second, prioritize simplicity under stress. If you can't use a tool when your hands are shaking, your mind is racing, and your body is exhausted, then it was never a survival tool to begin with. And third, keep your core wearable. The gear you leave behind in a backpack is just dead weight. The gear that stays on you accessible, simple, reliable, is what carries you through the storm. Because despite all the technological leaps we've made, the rules of nature have not changed since 1941. Adaptation, awareness, and a relentless focus on the fundamentals are what outlast chaos, cold, hunger, and fear. They always have. They always will. Thank you for watching Historia Prime. If this deep dive into the science of resilience brought value to your life, consider hitting that like button, sharing this video with someone who takes preparedness seriously, and subscribing to help keep these forgotten lessons alive. Until next time, keep fueling the fire of knowledge, and remember, the best survival tool is the one between your ears.